Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Stefan Seltz-Axmacher, CEO and co-founder of Polymath Robotics. Thanks for being on the show today, Stefan.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Did I pronounce it correctly? Are we good?
Yep. Everything good. Yeah. With a name as silly as mine, it's easy to mess up, but you did perfect at it.
Love that. Okay, great. Let's jump into it.
Yeah, sounds great.
Well, look, your background was pretty impressive for me, and I want to kind of set the stage for our listeners initially, just to talk about that, how you started in your career, what you've done, and then up to this point of founding Polymath.
Yeah, of course. So let's say 10-ish years ago, which, geez, makes me feel terrible. 8 years. Let's round down to 8 years ago. I had a Craigslist roommate who had moved into my San Francisco mission apartment and took over our living room and started building robots in it. He wanted to build a BB-8, which dates it a little bit. And then when Sphero showed that they had a BB-8, he lost interest in the project. And we were going on a road trip, and we started talking about what the next cool robot he could build was. And I had known about this interesting problem in the trucking industry, that essentially no one wants to spend 3.5 weeks at a time driving a truck across the U.S. because of how big the U.S. is and how much that still doesn't pay. So there's this weird shortage of drivers. So as a kind of silly business guy who hadn't written a line of code before, thought, how hard could it possibly be to make a truck remote control? If they can do, if Northrop Grumman can do it with drones in Afghanistan, obviously we could crank it out a weekend. That idea became a company called Starsky Robotics. The whole thought process of how easy robots could be got beaten out of my head with a brick in a back alley repeatedly for 5 years. And our kind of knee-jerk reaction to that was, for us to have a chance at all of making a truck that can drive without a person in it, let's control every possible variable we can. Let's take a stock truck and apply our own mechatronic device to it to turn it into a drive-by-wire truck. Let's build our own teleop, autonomy, safety. Let's build our own fleet management to tell it where to go so that we can choose the routes with the best cell service and the best regulatory framework and the best lane lines. Let's be the trucking company. And that actually worked from a product perspective. We had a pretty thriving and successul autonomy ready trucking business. We did the world's first driver out public highway test. But it's a super complicated pain in the butt company to run. And when we went to go talk to VCs and we're no, you have to build autonomy this way, and no, safety works that way, and no, regulatory works this way, and no, trucking works this way. It just was a storyline that the capital markets couldn't really get their heads around. And frankly, there was so much surface area of it that it was easy to say no to our trucking business, but think teleop was a good idea. Or easy to say yes to the idea we should be vertically integrated, but assume that someone else was going to crank out Gen AI 3 months later, which is the thing I've heard repeatedly since starting that company in 2015. But along the way, every time that company got a decent amount of press, and we were very fortunate with press, so there's a lot of that, I'd get emails to our partners at account saying hey, I'm a executive vice president at a $25 billion company you've never heard of. We have these 17 vehicles that are super weird. No one else in the world uses them. We're the only people who use them. We can't hire anyone to drive them. If we pay you like $8 million, can you make it into a robot? And we had to say no to all of those opportunities. And the thing that is funny is that basically every high-profile robotics company gets those emails. So in 2021, my co-founder Ilya, who I whisked this particular spotlight away from to be on this podcast instead of, and I teamed up and thought, because he had had a similar experience when at ClearPath, and thought like, what if we build autonomy such that we can say yes to that sort of stuff, such that like the parts of robotics that the listeners have been building and rebuilding for their entire careers, like from the first time that they built a line following robot as a kid to every project in grad school to the first internship they had to each of their jobs. What if we took every part of that stack that we could build modularly and in a reusable way and build that just as a thing that we could sell to other technical teams to be able to more quickly automate these many, many specific use cases. And that's what we're doing at Polymath Robotics.
That's very cool. Just a more curiosity-based question. Why, if a company already has equipment that, well, I guess I'm answering my own question. If they've already got this equipment, they want to turn it into robots. Is there not a benefit of like trying to trade that in or replace it with vehicles that people can drive? Or is it then a manpower issue, like actually having the staff to do it?
Bunch of problems. I mean, like, honestly, like this is one of those, all happy families look similar, but all unhappy families are different for their own reasons sorts of problems. Where when you get into these low volume vehicles, everything gets weird. The big consistency is they almost always have a problem hiring and retaining labor to drive them. Like almost always, almost all of these use cases have a labor problem. Like that's in fact why there's so much SKU diversity. But take a vehicle. There's a vehicle they use in a certain type of mine called a leveler. Essentially, you can think about it as a bulldozer with a 20-foot drum at the end of it. And that drum just like chews up the ground to make it so wheel loaders can scoop up the ground materials, put them into haul trucks, and like that's what your mining process is. To make up a number, and I know about what levelers do, but I haven't done like a full like market survey. My hunch would be there's comfortably no more than 2,000 levelers in the world. Maybe 1,000. Okay. At a fairly standard mine in Northern Territory, Australia, West Australia, places where these vehicles get used, labor cost on each one of them is north of $1 million a year.
For each one?
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's insane.
So, like, my question is like, why are we screwing around with like forklifts?
Yeah.
As an industry.
Why
are we screwing around with like, golf carts or mowing golf courses? There's a whole bunch of these use cases where like, oh, okay, your robot works reliably 20 hours and then you need to like do some software updates every 2 hours. That's way better than labor. Cool, go for it. You need to strap another $15,000 LiDAR on it, but it will last 3 years. That's fine. Terrific. Whereas, that breaks the model of a robotaxi.
Yeah. Interesting. So I guess I'm more curious. How did you identify all of these gaps? And like from a market perspective, like where did, because you obviously didn't come from the mining industry, you were getting these incoming.
But I'm not even, I mean, to be clear, I'm not just talking about mining. I'm talking about the same things exist in ports, same things exist in ag. There's a whole bunch of corners of this. To be frank, right now, the whole world read the TechCrunch articles of 2018 about how imminently we'd never drive again. Like everyone who kind of likes technology saw those articles. So many of those people work in tech or work adjacent to tech or live in large major metros. But some portion of them work at steel mills in Indiana. Some portion of them run large ag conglomerates in the Central Valley. Some portion of them run oil and gas companies in rural Canada. Or make important decisions at them. And they've seen like, oh, look at these raw denim wearing hipsters in San Francisco, like trying to figure out how to make an Uber cost $3 to get across town instead of $5. If only I could have them apply this to my my haul trucks. Like, who cares about Uber? I need to move materials from A to B.
So strange. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true.
Those people have been like reaching out to roboticists for years to try to get solutions. And that's honestly a big part of how we found this. But like more than that, it is weird that in robotics everyone has to rebuild the same stuff over and over and over again. Like it is, I think my a thing I have on a VC slide. So to say, I'm rounding towards the truth, but it's not technically 100% true. Is that on our 12-person team, we've worked on collectively something like 17 autonomy stacks, and like no one's been working for 40 years. If you were to say that about a website, that would be like, wow, you've worked for a bunch of bad web companies in a row. Like the reason SaaS is doing so well, that it's and mobile apps have done so well. The reason for all of that is microservices. It's that like to launch a website, you don't need to build a data center. You don't need to have to rewrite what a button looks like for the first time. You don't need to figure out credit card processing. You don't need to figure out user ID stuff and authentication. Like you can just grab that stuff from AWS and Facebook and GitHub and whatever. You don't need to build that yourself. In robotics, every new project starts with, okay, how do we kind of drive smoothly?
Not standardized, yeah.
How do we take this sensor that we spent $15,000 on and turn it into, I see something 10 feet in front of me most of the time? And, that might be days of work with really, really good engineers. And that series of tasks that are days of work means months, quarters, years, which means that precious startup time or precious program time is wasted reinventing the wheel as opposed to creating value. And like all of that kind of like distraction away from making the thing that actually matters is part of why you see programs that are huge and important and do really cool stuff get shut down. Because like while a company like Cruise did some of the most important robotics work of the last 10 years, their acquirer and their investors expected a lot of that to have been done before they started, and expected to see a wide fleet of robo-taxis by now. So they're not being judged by cool robotics. They're being judged by, why don't you have 100,000 robo-taxis for me?
Yeah, the whole AV space is, I think that's an episode in itself, right? How long we've been waiting for it, the writing on the wall with regulation and safety, and then all the setbacks and all the failures, and yeah. I mean,
again, I think safety and regulation are red herrings. The whole problem is this microservices issue. Like it has been explicitly legal to deploy driver-out autonomous vehicles on public roads in U.S. states the size of European countries for 10 plus years.
Has it really been that long now? Wow.
Yeah. If anyone says regulations, they're covering up a bad tech stack. Like just explicitly. Like if you're saying, oh, we can't drive on public roads, that's why the robot doesn't work. Like, no, the robot doesn't work. Florida is the size of Italy. And has more people in it than Scandinavia. It has been legal to put driver-out vehicles on public roads in Florida since 2013.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, every regulatory excuse is a technical cover-up, and the technical cover-up is not because engineers are dumb or lazy or whatever. It's because if you take the smartest people in the world but make them reinvent the wheel every 3 weeks. And then wonder why they don't have, a Camaro in 2 years. Surprisingly, not a lot gets done.
Yeah, that's fair. I was seeing some of the, I guess you guys have seen this firsthand from your companies and stuff like that, but then I was looking at some of your team makeup, and I'd love to get into the whole team dynamics and stuff like that in a little bit. But one of the companies that stood out to me was Hyperloop, and like you had people from there. I used to work at Hyperloop One, so I used to lead talent acquisition over there. So, and then firsthand, you see like something like that has never been built before, and everyone's like, in some ways banging their head against the wall, but reinventing a whole new transportation concept and trying to incorporate things that needs regulatory, needs infrastructure, needs all of this. And it's just like, you're not going anywhere. It's just a money pit after a while, as good as the idea and technology is. Yeah, it's really tough.
I think in tech, we underestimate the structural advantages of like SaaS and consumer web apps. And like we assume like, okay, cool, a programmer can crank out an e-commerce website in a weekend and it could theoretically be a $2 million a year business 6 months later. I'm really smart. I went to fancy robotics program. I learned. I taught myself to code when I was 8. I did blah 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 blah. I'm not talking. I'm talking about proverbial someone else. None of those things are true for me. If that programmer can do that for something as stupid as an e-commerce website, I can build a robot or a new transportation paradigm or a novel hardware business or a novel therapeutic in 2 years. And the problem is the infrastructure that supports that e-commerce website doesn't exist for Hyperloop, doesn't exist for robotics. Like, right. I mean, right. It was but pre-2019, there wasn't great visualization software to see what your robots were doing. You'd have to build your own. Like, there's a chance that Cruise's lasting legacy will be open sourcing what they built on visualization software. But what now has become Foxglove might in part be their biggest impact on the world of robotics 10 years from now, which in some ways is a shame, but also is why you should open source stuff. Like in e-commerce, there's, I don't know, 10 unicorns who will sell you dashboards on how many t-shirts you sold last month. There's another 50 companies who will actually mail the t-shirts for you. There's, I don't know, 100,000 firms that will create the website for you to host it. Everything from a Shopify to some team of guys in India. And none of that exists if you're building Hyperloop. If you're building Hyperloop, it's like, oh, we have to invent how to build a public transit system. We have to build a Hyperloop. We have to figure out how to dynamically balance the car on the mag rails. We have to do this whole long series of hard things. And you think about the magnetic balancing problem. You don't think about there isn't a startup playbook for building a transportation system. Whoops. Right. Yeah.
And then we have to go to government, and then we have to get approval, and then we have to get all the money for the infrastructure project. Yeah, it's way too many hurdles.
Yep.
Let's talk about your technology in a bit more detail. So you guys obviously offer this autonomous navigation modules.
Yep.
For these off-highway vehicles. Can you elaborate more on the tech behind that and what those modules look like?
Yeah, so in a way, I'd say we've built our stack the way that I think everyone wants to build their stack. Just timelines mean no one gets to be frank. There's lots of smart decisions we've made, and I'd like to claim that we're the biggest geniuses of the world. But in reality, most teams, when they set out to build their own robotics program, think they'll build it this way, and then they get told to not because they have to hit a timeline. But essentially, what we've done is everything from drivers for how to get data out of a LiDAR, to massaging those point clouds into obstacles, to putting them into a cost map, to charting a global plan across that cost map, to chart to a local plan beneath that, and the behavior architecture to figure out which of those things you need to do, and an autonomy core that reliably turns on. We've built all of that stuff the same as most of your listeners have recently or are currently doing at their current jobs, but we built it without any assumptions built in. We built it where we don't assume that we're driving a bulldozer or a tractor or a vehicle that's 2 feet long or a vehicle that's 8 feet long or 40 feet long. We built it without assuming that we're using an OS 0 or a Z camera or an ultrasonic sensor. We've also built it where every single one of those components I mentioned are kind of a standalone module that can publish to each other or can publish to other people's stacks. We've kind of built autonomous navigation with good software practices. And the reason why that's powerful is because that same stack runs on more different types of vehicles than we have people on our team. And we basically have that stack sitting underneath a series of hardware abstraction layers between us and the sensors and us and the actual vehicle, so that like the same obstacle detection code that runs on a tractor that drives in a field can run on a bulldozer in a mine, even if that bulldozer is using a different LiDAR. Even though that tractor in the field sometimes pulls trailers that I want to say 6x its length and add 2 extra joints and add 8 extra axles, give or take, and probably, let's say 10 to 20x its weight. We've built ourselves such that we have that level of flexibility, but like with a bunch of trade-offs. Like we're a little bit more compute heavy than if we were grinding things down for a given use case. We're kind of necessarily hardware agnostic, not just in that we get to use lots of different sensors, but also in that like we don't do hardware at all. Like for us to go onto a vehicle, we either need our customer to make that vehicle drive by wire for us, or we need to bring in a third-party integrator to make that vehicle drive by wire. We also don't know why you want that vehicle to move from A to B. Like I don't know if you want me to follow that harvester because that's the harvester I should be getting grain from. I don't know if you want me to follow that harvester because it's time to go to the shop. I don't have any idea or concept of the business logic above me because I don't know how to be a farmer and I don't know how to run a mine and I don't know how to run a landfill. What we believe kind of deeply is that all of what I just described as onboard vehicle navigation is inherently undifferentiated. It's really, really hard to write, but 1,500 different plus teams have built that point-to-point navigation before. Probably another couple hundred are working on it right now. You as a robotics team stand no benefit from building it. There's no long-term strategic advantage. There's no financial advantage. It's just a cost center hard thing that can kill your whole company. But where the real magic and the value lies is tying it all together into an actual product. And frankly, in knowing what that thing should do to create value for the end customer. So like that might be that 99% of onboard vehicle autonomy is undifferentiated. And you shouldn't build it yourself. You should have someone like Polymath provide it for you. But the 1% that really matters is maybe there's some clever magic in how you follow that harvester. Maybe there's some clever magic in how that bulldozer should push material. Maybe there's some clever magic with how you should dispatch haul trucks for a mine based on changing prevailing conditions. And the reason why SaaS companies are so incredibly freaking valuable is because someone can write a bunch of glue code around a product insight that email signatures are more successful if they have this one minor feature, and they can spin up a massive billion-dollar business that way. We want to make robotics look more like that, so that like our customers focus on the one part that is their key insight and on that makes their business actually work. And we provide the stuff that they'd frequently spend 80% of their man hours trying to build anyway.
Awesome. So is that happening right now? People are like taking your stack off the shelf to just incorporate into their robots, or is it all retrofitting existing machinery?
Both. I mean, like robots are systems of systems, and individual vehicles are systems within much larger systems than that. So most of those use cases I just talked about are things that we have live and are running on. Via tractors in field following harvesters and vehicles in ports and bulldozers in mines and stuff like that. Sometimes it's retrofit. Sometimes we're being designed directly into the robot from the get-go. Sometimes we're working with the OEM. A line I like to say is that our UI is a REST API, And if that doesn't mean anything to you, you probably can't be our customer. We can't do anything for Farmer Bob, but we can do something for large, technically sophisticated ag organizations. We can't do anything for Billy the miner, but we can put ourselves into a stack that has a nice UI for Billy the miner to interact with.
And from a end user perspective, what's the only, I guess, benefit from retrofitting with your technology to their existing machinery is if they've already had that CapEx cost and they don't want to be looking at buying whole new machinery or doing like a new RAS agreement or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the buying whole new machinery, frankly speaking, for a lot of use cases, doesn't exist. That's not a real option, either from a sourcing perspective or from a capital perspective. I'm not 100% confident on this, but that machine I described earlier, a leveler, I'm pretty sure those are $750 to $1.25 million machines. You don't just go to a leveler store and pick up a new one. Like, even if you want the same one you currently have, you call them and you give them a PO, and maybe you get one 6 months later when it rolls off the line. That's just not how that area of equipment works. I've heard a funny story once where someone in the lumber industry was looking at doing a program, and he had previously gotten a quote from another company, which would have had him. He would have needed to replace all of his industrial high-low devices with electric versions of them that were capable of also lifting, I want to say, 30,000 pounds at once. So think like really, really large forklifts that live outside and lift up 30,000 pounds. And as the price of entry to even talk about adding autonomy was replacing their current fleet of $200,000 machines with a electric fleet of $400,000 machines before the autonomy company could even, look at adding anything. That's just not like, if you're looking, if for that use case, I think they're only looking at saving something like $75,000 to $100,000 per machine per year. It's the math, it just doesn't pencil very easily. What's interesting about like these off-highway use cases is they're enterprise machines, which means they are more expensive and rarer than like a Toyota Prius.
Got it. Interesting. Let's talk about your growth as a company, because you mentioned that you had previously a lot of incoming interest from customers and stuff like that. But since then, and trying to expand, you mentioned various different channels here. What strategies have been pivotal for your growth and customer acquisition?
Yeah. So honestly, for us, we're kind of in a phase where we are honing in not just who we can win, but who can be the most successful with us. And I think that's gonna be an area for us in the next like six to 9 months. A weird thing in our market. So there's companies that look like us in terms of what they promise, who are basically consulting firms where if you pay enough money, they'll build you a robot. And the cost, at the proposal stage, the cost of that robot will be roughly the number of the amount of money you want to spend divided by their hourly rate is how many hours they think that robot will take to build. And then when reality happens, it turns out they need more hours. And those prices spin out of control. If we went to anyone in the world and told them we would build them any robot with any functionality they might ever ask for, we could sell a lot of deals. But we'd have a lot of unhappy customers 6 to 18 months later, 6 to 30 months later, and we'd have a lot of churn, and we'd have a lot of heartache. So really what we're focusing on at the moment is where's the happy ground between companies who can pay us enough that we can keep the lights on. Frankly, whether they do great at their part of the bargain or not, we need to be able to keep our lights on, which is a new focus of ours. Not just charging less, and then if they screw up, we're holding the bag. And then who has a better shot of actually being able to take a program forward once we've delivered a thing that works. So we're more in the turning away bad deals phase than we're in the like how do we manage to find folks in the first place, which is a cool problem to have. I'd say what that tends to look like is we tend to work best with folks who have already wet their whistle on robotics before. They've probably already been lied to about functionality and been disappointed. They've probably written some code on robotics themselves and have come to the realization that functionality they think is easy is actually very hard. So that like their expectations are a little more reasonable. And then like frankly, we need them to have sufficient organizational capital to keep the lights on. Because I think we're in a period right now where a lot of robotics programs are going to get shut down. Like it's not just going to be the high-flying billion-dollar organizations that didn't live up to the promises of 5 years ago. There's going to be programs where everyone's doing really good work, but the company just decided with interest rates being where they are, there's better places to invest their money in a high-risk, low-likelihood robotics program. So we need to find people who have tempered expectations of what they're going to get, by which I mean a robot that adds value by going from A to B and maybe one or two other relatively light things. No executives expecting AGI in a 6-month timeline, and they have the organizational strength to keep pushing for that when what they think will originally take 9 months takes 18 or takes 15.
That's great. I think that's a great takeaway as well for other startup founders or people that are looking at expansion for that ICP and being able to say, it's tough to say no to clients at first, at the early stage, but it's probably more detrimental to say yes and do a bad job and not deliver.
Yeah, and we've also found, frankly, the companies willing to pay us more are easier to work with than the companies who fight for every nickel, which has been interesting. Yeah. And basically any company that we've ever done anything for free for has let us down.
Yeah, I love having conversations like this because it makes you reflect on your own journey and those own situation. As we talked prior to hitting record, that this has been a very strange year in the market, right? It's been there's been consolidation, there's been companies going down, people have been scared to invest and spend, etc. And when things are like that, you kind of let go of some of those qualifications and bend your rules and stuff like that. But it makes you realize when you do have a good company, a good client, a good partner, how different they are to the bad ones and how much easier and better it is for the business. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think we're in a phase of the market where a lot of the hype robotics companies of the 21 era or even the pre-COVID era, the bills come due, and like there's a lot of teams out there who have been able to say, I need another 6 months for the last 5 years, and like that line isn't working anymore. Like there'll be programs that third parties think should be canceled. That won't be. But there will also be programs that will. I don't think cruise is the last surprise we're going to see in the next 6 months. I think we'll see some more like, holy crap, how did that happen? Now, like quietly below that, since interest rates started going up, I've started also seeing a decent number of companies who are kind of dead set focused on how do I get a robot into the world with only a seat around that is making a reasonable money. And I'm very optimistic about that whole group, but it will be like 5 years before they're on the covers of magazines. Like it will, like there will still be a bunch of like, don't look behind the man and don't look behind the curtain for the next couple of years. Like it will take a while for those like people to wash out. But like there's a number of companies right now who are quietly building real robotics businesses. And that's what's really exciting for me.
Yeah. Obviously, I had a conversation this morning with a VC, and it was a lot around that, trying to do more, trying to be more commercially minded or get to market with less because they're getting pressure from the VCs. They're going for a Series A and they're saying, well, what's your profitability like? How many customers do you have? Pilot's great, but we want to see LOIs and revenue. And it's like, well, we're still in R&D phase. Like, what do you expect? So now people are like,
I remember with Starsky. So there's VCs who are so there's a number of VCs, and like some of these people have been this angry for a while, who are so annoyed at the pre-revenue instant dollar companies in robotics. I remember I once got a rejection email from a VC who will likely have some degree of geopolitical power in the next 6 months, where he rejected my previous company just because, yeah, all you robotics companies want a lot of money and have $0 in revenue, and just point blank rejected us, even though in the deck that I had attached it showed revenue. But like there's a whole. Yeah, it's like I don't know how to respond to this. Like I would have expected revenue by now. Like we're at like a $6 million revenue run rate, man. Like there even in the good times, there was probably a third to 50% of VCs who were annoyed at robotics because of that. And now I think we're greater than 80-90. Now, like, on the other hand, there's VCs who need a plausible way for each investment to 5x their fund. So they'll write checks and stuff that has an 80% chance of being fraud, just in case, like, that remaining 20% chance of being real, like, would be so great. And that's going to be, those companies are going to continue to get the headlines for the next couple of years. But there's real stuff happening in robotics that I'm really excited about. Like a lot around solar, a lot around some of these kind of forgotten secondary industries, like washing buildings and stuff like that, where they're not the focus of the tech crunches of the world, but they're more important businesses long term, and they're more important to the market.
They're not sexy. They're not headline. But it's that dull, dirty, dangerous aspect. Yeah. But like you talked about labor issues and stuff like that, you make it works. You can deploy it right now. Yep. And start saving money right now or having an impact straight away. So, yeah. How's the funding journey been for you guys?
Yeah, so we first raised money in late 21, where between my background and the idea being significantly more sellable to VCs than vertical robotics, I could wink at a couple of people and raise an easy seed round. I assumed a year later we'd be raising a Series A. In that intermittent year, interest rates jumped up and like VCs just like disappeared. They just like retreated to a hole that summer. I don't know if anyone remembers that. Like every VC was out of office from like April of 2022 until like I want to say like October of 2022. I don't know where they all went. Maybe it was like a great migration. So we ended up doing YC that year to raise some more money, and then we raised a little bit more money at the beginning of this year. I think we're in this weird spot where we're close enough to building a real business, but we're not quite there yet from a numbers perspective. Where a cool a YC partner once told us that we looked more like a Series B company with shit financials than we looked like a Series A company.
Is that from a product maturity standpoint or what?
Yeah, basically, like where we are from a product perspective is like a Series B company who's like in the process of figuring out how to scale up, but like without we're a third of the way scaled up numbers. So we've been like we keep on putting off a Series A along those lines. Now, like in my position, I fortunately get to meet most or a large portion of people who are working on mobile outdoor robots, at least in the Bay Area. And from hearing those stories, I've also wanted to perpetually push back raising a Series A, because it seems like even if things are going really good, it's a full-time CEO 6-month job to raise a not very exciting Series A, which is why we've kind of continually focused on like, hey, what if we could just be profitable? Because life would be a lot better if I didn't have to wave my hands anymore.
Of course. But you think that it would be appealing for investors? Also, what I hear from the VCs as well is like, well, we're looking for that revenue. We're looking for the route to profitability. And if you're close to that and you just need the capital to scale or put some other things in place, that's more of a safer bet than someone at like, before that. But who knows? I don't know. It changes every month.
Yeah, VCs are a whole thing. Like, I mean, there's a great YCism that you don't trust the reason, you just trust the no. I once had a VC reject me for my last company, Starsky, where ahead of our driver out run, I was like doing coffee meetings with him every like month or two. I really interpersonally like the guy. I still do. Like I'd love to be friends with him. It'd be cool for him to be an investor. But ahead of the round, he was like, listen, I get the vision, I get the pitch, it all makes sense. The one thing that's going to make the decision for whether we invest or not is whether I think you can take the driver out of the truck. If you take the driver out of the truck, we will definitely invest. If I think you probably can take the driver out of the truck, I'll probably invest. But like that's going to be the sole criteria. So 4 months later, I'm feeling pretty cool about myself. I had myself a little video, send him an email like, hey VC, stoked to catch up with you. By the way, 3 days ago, we drove for 10 miles on a public road at 55 miles an hour next to the traffic of regular people being overtaken by grandmas in Florida with our 80,000 pound truck on a public road with no person in it. I can't wait to catch up with you about our next round. And he responded like upsettingly quickly after, like an hour later, 10 minutes later, whatever. Of like, sounds really exciting. However, for us, I think we really care about you being at scale. So why don't we talk again when you guys are making, 10, 20, $30 million a year with driver out trucks on public roads. I do not know what the magic line is for any particular company of when the money opens up and becomes easy. All I know is we talk to VCs on a regular basis as casual conversations. If one of them chomped at the bit and offered a bunch of money at exciting terms and seemed easy to work with, we'd happily work with them. But thus far, it seems like the broader VC market is just trying to figure out what's going on in robotics. I mean, I think like a bunch of them thought there was nothing in AV 15 years or 12 years ago. For some reason, a major OEM bought an AV company and they all realized, GM must know better than they did. So they poured money into AV companies and poured money into robotics companies because like, GM must be pretty smart. Robotics must be closer than we thought. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense to me. It seems to make sense to someone else. And that other firm down the street invested, so probably we should invest because they must know something that we don't know. And that led to a bunch of these investments. And so far, none of them have really worked out. And I think like a lot of the smart VCs right now are going back to fundamentals and trying to be like, it still doesn't seem like this is ready. And maybe I should just wait until there's an obvious thing that works.
Yeah. I think
so. Maybe that means $1 million of revenue and you're good to go. That has not been what I've seen. Maybe it means you have 1,000 robots that are scaling and you're at 20, 30, 50, $100 million a year with 80% margins. I don't know many companies who have gotten there, but if you get to that point, I don't think you need VCs.
No,
I think
I don't think so.
Enough that if you can get yourself to ramen profitability or even just slight profitability, they start to no longer be the right funding source for this market.
Yeah. You self-fund, go for debt. There's strategic
or
partnerships.
Or you equity to other weird structures or what have you. I mean, the VC market itself is not in a great shape. It's kind of like I'm asking for advice. I'm asking for it's the blind leading the blind sort of thing, where VCs themselves are struggling to raise their own next fund.
Yeah, it's a very strange time. I'm really curious to see what 2025 brings from an investment landscape because I've spoken to a lot of people that they're like, we have capital, we're waiting to deploy, we just don't know where to right now, or we're waiting to see how the market shapes out. They think there'll be like more downsizing, more consolidation, or everyone.
But some of those people have less capital than they say they have. Some of those folks have capital, but it's already allocated to follow-on investments and things they've already done. Some of those folks have capital, but they're not able to raise any more. And if they spend all that capital, they shut down as a firm. there's like a weird thing, a thing that really freaked me out maybe like 12 months ago is I sent like a blast update to a big list of VCs I knew, like maybe like 75, 100. And I got like 5 bounce backs from GPs at like real firms who on LinkedIn said they still worked there.
Oh, and they're no longer at the firm.
There are like whole firms. Yeah. There's like whole firms that have gone into zombie mode. Like there are certainly firms that have capital to invest and where that is totally real. There's firms who have capital that will be invested, but not really, kind of. And there's firms that like exist and are still taking meetings and like don't actually have the ability to write checks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like
I know some,
the whole world
like,
of finance is such a spin.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said I know some that are just like not raising, they're not doing another round, but they still have their employees there. All they're doing is kind of like speak to their portfolio companies, having meetings, making introductions, but there's no investment to be.
Yep. And a lot of those folks will take a meeting with a new robotics company, like because it's neat, it's an interesting conversation to have, and you get to learn something. And a lot of those robotics companies are just wasting their time. Like I certainly in 22 was invited to a partner meeting at a firm that like a month and a half later I learned something public that was like, oh, that was a fake partner meeting. They like there was no world where they invested. That firm is falling apart. Like, great.
Keep him busy.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. That was really, really nice of you.
Afternoon.
Like, great professional ethics.
Before, I know we're getting close to time, but there's a couple of other things I wanted to ask you about. Because obviously in the CEO role, and you mentioned how big your team is, and we touched on where people have come from. What kind of qualities do you look for or prioritize when you're hiring in such a lean and focused team?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, we get to be mostly a team of systems engineers. So you generally have to be a pretty good generalist robotic software engineer. We're not really in a spot where we can hire. I mean, back in the late 2010s or 20-teens boom, there was controls engineers commanding amazing salaries who couldn't write code. Where like if you hired them, you had to hire a second software engineer to code up the algorithms that they do in MATLAB. That seems to be gone, and that's not what we're hiring here at Polymath. So we're generally looking at really smart generalist roboticists. We're generally looking at people who have built robots themselves before. Oftentimes that's at a job, but my kind of favorite, especially for newer talent, is if they show me something that they built at home. So like we have a junior engineer who, when he was looking for an internship, sent a video of a robot arm doing an interesting task. Like that was his like master's school project, but like the whole thing was custom built. And I gotta be honest, that video was so impressive. I did not care about the fact that the email said it was for a different company. Like I did not care about the fact that like he like clearly had copy pasted this from like someone else's like step 4 of their interview process. It was like, oh wow, you're an amazing engineer. Like that's what we want. So that's kind of generally, and then also, frankly, really good software practices are important for us. The difference between us actually building what we're trying to build, us building this like modular reusable autonomy stack, and us being an inadvertent negative margin consulting company is the difference in documentation and good software practices and calling out your variables correctly and all of those sorts of things that a lot of roboticists have never had to focus on because they wanted to do it at the start, but were told to make a fully functioning robot 3 months earlier than they originally thought, and therefore built none of those practices in.
Love that. And for the future, are there any emerging trends that excite you in robotics and how you guys are going to position yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think incidentally, this whole idea the what's going on in ventures incidentally kind of good for us. You no longer can get $200 million because you thought an autonomous excavator for lumber yards was a good idea. Like, you no longer can raise that money on that, which means you have to get to something useful in robotics with $1 to $4 million, which obviates the idea that you can build everything yourself. Like, that is the world of the 2015 to 2022 era. That door is shut. Some people will still be able to live in it, but like most will not, and most will have massive expectations of functionality and time. And that is very good for a company like us that sells tools to get you more functionality in less time. Additionally to that, I think a tailwinds that robotics can benefit from is around this kind of popular idea of AI roll-ups. So there's an idea at the moment in PE land of raise a private equity vehicle to buy some sort of business that can benefit from some series of vertical AI tools, deploy those vertical AI tools, and then start buying competitors to deploy more of those tools into to have crazy good margins in, I don't know, document sorting or whatever. There's a limited number of places, or there's a less interesting number of places where you can do that in just within pure software AI. Like that's harder to do in paralegal services than it is to do in lumber yards, or than it is to do in landfills, or than it is to do in almond orchards. So I think there's a convergent path for a number of robotics companies where if they can get a robots as a service or vertical solution that's integrated from a bunch of components quickly out into the world for some use case, that at a certain point it either gets acquired by one of those PE roll-up vehicles, or more interestingly, can transition into doing that as well. And that's probably a big part of what success looks like I think in like the 2 to 5 year time frame.
Yeah, those are great insights. Thanks for your perspective there.
Absolutely.
Well, look, Stefan, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you again for stepping in last minute.
Yeah.
And joining. I appreciate that. Where can our listeners learn more about you and the company and connect with you all?
Yep. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Our website's polymathrobotics.com. And we have a great podcast of our own called Automate It, which you can listen to wherever you find your podcasts.
We'll link all of this in the show notes, and hopefully a lot of people will check that out as well. Yeah, thanks again. Perfect. And I hope to keep in touch.
Thanks so much, Greg. Great to chat.